this is the summary of what we're going to discuss. And the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a biblical discussion. If you put up the next slide. Now, this is a book I'm reading called Bible and Ecology by a chap called Richard Bauckham. And as I've said, some people may think it's an anomaly to be green and Christian. I mean, you just have to look at the evangelical right in America to sort of think, well, maybe Christians aren't very green. But I want to slowly show by going through this book that in actual fact, it is quite Christian to be green. So I'll be slowly reviewing a bit of this as I go along. And his phrase is the community of creation. And he thinks the modern interpretation of Genesis 1:26 and 28, the human domination over the world, started with Francis Bacon in the 17th century. And this sort of led on to the idea of plunder, especially in modern farming techniques, what James Lovelock calls breathtaking hubris. It is a belief that we can overcome creation, or Gaia, Earth's natural order. Now, it can be shown that Christians before, and again, hopefully soon, will be part of a system of order in creation within which we should live. Our stewardship should have us within creation, interdependent with it, not transcendent technocrats. Now, Richard Bauckham thinks the dominion theme needs to be put in the context of Genesis as a whole, that on each day, God saw that it was good, that each day of creation was good in itself and should be valued, and that we are part of this whole that was very, very good. So allotments will be shown to be a part of valuing what we have been given. There are methods of growing that enhance the soil, give us healthy microbiomes, food and exercise, and can allow biodiversity and be green lungs within towns and provide local and economically produced food. Okay, so that's a little clip from, to review that book. And this is a ceanthus tree that's on my allotment, and an early bee. And I also saw a butterfly too, but haven't had time to load that butterfly up. So these are first beginnings on the allotment, and then we will start looking at crop rotation. Now, I use this book, Your Organic Allotment, that's in the text, and they have the idea of crop rotation, and this just gives a list of vegetables. I mean, obviously fruit is different. My fruit bushes sort of border one side of the allotment, acting as a kind of windbreak, because my allotment's quite windy. And there's group A, B, C, and D. And the idea is that each year you grow one lot in one part of the allotment and then move around. So B would become A, and so forth. And it's all in that book. Okay, so the next slide is more about, I've started planting seeds. Now, last year, I managed to get seeds from the courgettes, beetroots, globe artichokes, borage, chard, potatoes, and sunflowers. And I've also got some new seeds as well. Now, a seed mulch has been laid to grow as a permaculture idea. This will grow up and be kept trimmed and hopefully allow crops to be planted into it. and deter my pervasive couch grass. This is something I'm trying out. I'm not sure if it will work or not, but I've sowed red clover and fenugreek at the beginning of March. And my seeds, I've sowed a first lot on the beginning of March too, in seed trays in the allotment, because I get late frosts and high winds, in the greenhouse. But if you don't have a greenhouse, I also use window ledges as well around the house. And as I've said, you can harvest seeds as you go along. Take some off as you get beans sprouting, or let some go to seed. I let my beetroot, some of them go to seed, so I can harvest the seeds and water them every few days. Or if you're just planting the seeds straight in the soil, make sure you water them as well. And I'm staggering what I'm planting this year, so I don't get a glut. Last year I was getting bucketfuls of beetroots and tomatoes and handing them on to friends and relatives, which I'm sure they're very grateful for. And usually I put down some nematodes before I plant out. They're biological little worms that eat the slugs for about 6 weeks. But you can otherwise just go out first thing in the morning and weed the slugs. I'm going to be planting them into a mandala, and there's a picture of the mandala on the next slide. This is a permaculture idea that I thought, when I saw it in this book, Gaia's Garden, is so much more interesting than rows. It's sort of, you plant into keyholes, so you can sort of walk into them. And I use straw to mark the sort of paths, which are the brown bits. And those are the different crop groups. And I've moved them all round this year. So I've used the last year's map, and I've just sort of in Photoshop scrubbed out last year's and put on this year's. So that's a mandala, and it's quite an interesting and artistic way to use the ground. Okay, so the next slide is of a frog waking up. I've got frog ponds in the hopes that they will eat the slugs and snails. And I've got 2, and I've also got an old canoe that we had in the garden, but I found that frogs had taken up residence in it, so we moved that to the allotment as well. And then the next is more on crop rotation. Now, crop rotation was devised in the sort of, I think, 1700s, a traditional system of planting that lessens the possibility of crop diseases and suppresses weeds if used with mulches. And we could use much less insecticide if we went back to this method of farming. And Compassion in World Farming and Ice Group point out that some animals could have a happy life and be part of the system, providing natural fertilizers. I mean, I get my compost this last year from a dairy farmer. Allotments could be part of this process. And the last slide is about sheet mulching. Now, sheet mulching, I could go really, really over the top about that, because this is the way we can save all the soil for the planet that many different groups have told us is going to fail within 60 years, the way we're treating it. So sheet mulching is a permaculture idea, and that's the book that I got the idea from. And it's a great book to have. And it's how to cultivate without digging. and it keeps the carbon in the ground and helps the soil. Now, we, unfortunately, on our allotments, we have couch grass. And so I have to dig that out before I can really get going with the sheet mulching. So I've dug out most of it, but I was down there this morning digging out some more. But I mean, mostly it's worked. Last autumn, we laid down some volcanic ash, a bit of lime where we're going to grow brassicas. That's cabbagey type things. But you have to follow safety advice if you're using lime. And we put volcanic ash, which I bought nicely and cheaply from the Allotment Society shop. And then I used all of the cardboard. I'm an artist, so I get quite a lot of supplies with plain cardboard packaging. So I just store it, and we put that all over the soil. And then actually on top of that, I've missed a bit, straw. I got a whole lot of straw from a place on Free Cycle. We just went and collected it. They were giving away some old straw, and then on top of that we put manure. And because of the current restrictions, I got that delivered from a farm, and that was put all over. So I'm talking about sheet mulching in spring because now's the time to start collecting all plain cardboard packaging and paper from friends, neighbours, and store under a plastic sheet or a shed, and start a compost heap and invite everyone's green waste from kitchen and garden. And it should be waste that hasn't been treated with Roundup or other chemicals. My own current compost area is fenced in with corrugated metal sheeting, and my older one is made from pallets. And these materials we got on Free Cycle. And after a few years, it will rot down into great compost. And I use that as well as what I get brought in. And I also have rain bucks, which are great. I've used one to make my own tomato food. We grow comfrey and nettles and put them in a water butt with rainwater, and that rots down into tomato food. So that's why I've introduced sheet mulching now, because although we lay it down in the autumn, it now is the time to start collecting all the material for it. And that's the end of the presentation. And so we can come back and maybe unmute and see what we'd like to do. Would we like to go into some groups, or shall we just do some questions and answers? What do you think? We've got 18 people, participants.
Well, if I suggest that there might be some questions that have arisen from your presentation that everybody would like to know the answers to. So maybe three or four questions now, and then we could go into groups to discuss what we're doing in our own plot, as it were. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Good.
So put your hand up, or make some kind of sign if you've got a question you'd like to ask. Oh, right, great. Helena.
Well, I planted mustard seed as a green manure on my allotment a couple of weeks ago, and it's all germinated. And I was thinking I would leave it and then dig it in, and that would be my area of the allotment that was going to grow my courgettes and pumpkins. But I'm wondering now whether I should just maybe leave it and plant into it after what you said about your seeds. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to try and strim my green manures, because if you keep them short, what I've read and heard from other allotment holders, then they don't get too strong, so you can still plant into them. If you let them grow and flower, then the roots get too strong.
Ah, okay. Okay.
So I've got a little battery powered strimmer that I'm going to take down and strim my red clover that I planted in the autumn.
Okay.
And I'll just then I'll try planting into it and see how that goes.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, helpful.
Great. I think Derek had a question.
Yeah, I've just been so impressed by Helena's question, I forgot what mine was. But it's come back to me. I'm just working on setting up a community garden up here in Ochterarder, just outside Perth, and we're going to have traditional raised beds where we're going to grow our vegetables. But are there any tips that you would suggest about when you put in a raised bed? You know, you obviously have to fill it with stuff, so we're going to have to get some material to go in there. But should we lay cardboard on the ground that's there, then put the raised bed down, then fill it with compost and mulch? Or, you know, hints and tips around filling raised beds.
Do you get a lot of rain?
Average.
Because the problem with raised beds as we go along with climate change is that as they're above the ground, they won't get ground level water. That's the only drawback with them. So you may find you have to water them more. That's why I don't have raised beds. I demarc the areas with straw, so I don't tread on the vegetables. So that's why I haven't gone in for raised beds, because I don't want to be having to do lots of extra watering. Although I am planning a system. I got a system from FreeCycle, little hose pipes with holes in them, and I'm going to set up some rain butts on the back of my art studio that's just behind the allotment, and try and water through that system. But I'm down in Bournemouth, so I get a lot of sorry, I get a lot of water. I mean, I don't get a lot of water because we get a lot of sun down here. So,
yeah, we've already constructed our beds. We've just sort of, you know, make them operational, and I think we'll have enough water just now. But it's a good thought that perhaps we'll give some thought to as we go forward if we do start to dry out a little bit. But generally, it's getting rid of water is our problem, and not having.
Well, I suggest you could maybe put some little irrigation channels into there, you know, with some old hosing, and feed it from rain butts, and with your amount of water you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, I think that's true. Katia, and then Sue Charlton, please.
Well, maybe Derek, I can just tell you, we started, so I live in Wales. We have, when you say probably average, it depends where in the world you are, what you call average rain. Yeah, I come from Germany. The average rain is different to here. So Wales has a lot of, we have, I think, a lot of rain, but my husband made me 4 raised beds for the rotation. And we had just lawn there, but not looked after lawn. So he put the beds down, and we took, a friend of ours has an organic farm, and they were our tutors. They on Zoom, they literally got us through the whole year, and we would take photos and tell us. And so we had the raised beds. She told us not to put the cardboard on the ground, but we had topsoil delivered. And then we had from there the horse manure and our compost, our own compost. And it worked so well with the raised beds. That easy to, they were, I think, it's 1 meter 20. My husband built something like this, that you can come from both sides just in arm reach, and a path all the way around. So it's yeah, 4 long beds, and it just works for me. And I think we have a lot of rain.
Katja, thank you very
You
much.
do.
That's great. We'll do away with the cardboard idea, and we'll make sure we get topsoil in, and then cover with mulch and compost on top.
Yeah.
We put the cardboard over the winter. We put the cardboard in at the end. The good stuff isn't washed out now, so we just lifted it now and started putting the first seeds and onion sets in. But it's she did say, because we didn't really, I think it depends what you have, how much, if you had mice or worms. I think for us there was not much underneath. So depending on how much growth you have of weeds underneath, that it still could be the cardboard thing.
We had a lot of weeds last summer, which we've tried to clear out before going any further. But
Yeah.
you know, so it has been weed infested for several years.
So
Yeah.
maybe cardboard after all, then on the very
Yeah.
bottom, and then yeah.
Yeah, that will also hold moisture, the cardboard, as it rots down. The other thing, of course, is about raised beds is that they're no dig, which is a real benefit to the soil structure,
Yeah.
which really helps. Sue Charlton would like to say something.
Talking about raised beds, that was one of the first things I put in on my allotment 6-7 years ago. Not all of the plot, but a good third of it. I think a lot depends on what your soil structure is like to start with. We sit on London clay, but there are patches because our site is in a valley where the Brent River goes through between Ealing and Harrow, which is quite hilly. And so we also have a lot of pebbles, and some areas of each site are slightly sandy. But ultimately, we get a fair amount of rain, not as much in the southeast as obviously in the northwest and so on. But we still get times when, because of climate change, you know, it's invariably you get long, hot, dry spells and then an awful lot of rain. So the raised beds helps enormously with drainage for this. That's the first thing. Lots of people have talked about weeds and couch grass. Our paths are laid with couch grass. That's a doddle as far as I'm concerned. Our biggest problem is bindweed. And there you can't see it, and you leave a millimetre of root and it springs up. And so that's been a perennial problem of just managing it. We'll never get rid of it, but you just have to keep yanking it out. And it's much easier to control the beds where it doesn't grow quite as far and as fast, because you can concentrate on your 4 foot by 5 meters or whatever it is. Ours is a traditional site with rods, poles or perches, so long, thinnish strips, if you like. So I find that really, really helpful. It also reduces some of the worst of the pests, because the slugs have got to climb up over the board and down, and they're not that interested. It also helps. We have rats and mice and voles. Obviously, I love the voles. I don't mind the rats. It's fine until they start eating all your stuff. But again, they prefer to go to the compost heap where it's warm and it's food. As far as rats are concerned, living on allotment is like living in a larder, so we can't complain too much about that. So one way and another, with clay underlay soil of most of our plot and other areas, I mean, I was brought up in Bournemouth, so I know the soil structure, certainly of Southbourne Bournemouth, to the east of the main part of the town, was very, very sandy. But our soil in London is totally different, and I'm sure others will say different things about their soil structures. I think that's the crucial thing when you're thinking of raised beds. And also, as Deborah, you said, the fact of them being just 4 foot wide means from either side you can reach to the middle of your plot, and it stops you from trampling on it and compacting the soil and keeping the soil structure as good as possible. Oh, and the last thing, every time I've cleared a bed, I lay down a green manure. And certainly, Helen, I think you were talking about planting into mustard cress, for instance. Well, the mustard grows to about 3 or 4 foot. So you couldn't grow into that without keeping it low, or it would deprive any seedlings or plants you put in of light and air. So, but dug in, it's great. Mustard is particularly good against onion weevily things. So I like to put mustard in the autumn when I've pulled out the whatever I've had in there, and then if I'm going to be putting onions in there the next time, I feel that's kind of cleansed that bit of soil.
Yes. Is there anybody else with a question or a comment that we can? I have one actually, Marisa. Your mandala design, I noticed there was a 5th part of it. You got your A, B, C, D, and there was a 5th one. So what's that for? The empty one?
Well, that's just an overflow.
An overflow. Okay. So things that don't fit, they just squeeze in there. That's lovely.